Illumination's villains are often known for being creative, quirky, silly, and occasionally powerful. They can usually bring the laughs, but they also have just enough of an intimidation factor to be an actual threat. But given that we've already ranked these baddies on their morality and strengths, we felt that it was time we figured out which Illumination villain has the most brainpower. Hey guys, I am Brad with Wicked Bench, and this is Illumination Villains, Dumb to Brilliant. First, we have the characters who are not the brightest. Starting the tier, we have Mike the Mouse. Though he's more of a jerk than a villain, we felt it was fair to include him on our list, even if we're also gonna roast him a little bit. Whether it's due to his cockiness or an actual lack of intelligence, it can't be denied that Mike comes off as having all talent but no brain.
Off the stage, Helga. Go on, you're useless.
Being someone who's usually out to make a quick buck, he's willing to cheat to win big, but isn't clever enough to get away with it, as we see when the Bears catch him hiding cards under his jacket. Before he even wins Buster's singing competition, Mike, ever confident that the money is already his, goes out and buys an expensive car, further putting himself into debt. The thing is, he might have at least gotten away from the Bears if not for him deciding to perform in the Moon Theater's big show, something he only did out of pride. Honestly, it's no wonder he most likely got eaten. Next is another antagonist from the first Sing movie, the Bear Mob. While Mike may be one of the dumber characters from the Sing franchise, the Bears aren't exactly geniuses either. The leader bear is able to catch on to Mike's cheating, but that's really the only smart moment that any of the Bears have. After all, when they try to get the money from Buster, they pay no mind to the glass floor and walls filled with water, which leads to this glass getting broken and all the people, including the Bears, nearly drowning in the theater. They also give up tracking down Mike quickly when they think that he's drowned, which sort of makes them seem like less of a serious threat. While they are certainly powerful and strong, we can't say that it would take much to trick them. Our next section we like to call the average folks, the characters who land somewhere in between dumb and brilliant. First is the Onceler. While he is pretty simple, the Onceler actually has some impressive skills. He knows how to play guitar and sew, he's a crafter, an entrepreneur, and is able to successfully make millions off his sneeds, expanding his factory and productivity tenfold. Of course, for all this success, there's one huge caveat that takes a bit away from his intelligence ranking: his destruction of the environment.
Yeah, bad. Right.
The Onceler's evil was prompted by greed and pride, both of which can be blinding. You have to wonder, though, how blinding they could be when the environment is literally getting destroyed around him. Also, given the fact that the Onceler had already come up with a compromise that would have allowed him to still make his sneeds without chopping down any trees, you would think that he would have focused on inventing a machine that picks up the truffle of fluff more easily, instead of just making giant axe machines. He could have easily planted more trees as he was chopping them down, but no, just a bit of convincing from his mother is all that it takes from the Onceler to take the easiest and most destructive route, and in turn, seal his fate. At the very least, we'll give him credit that he was smart enough to keep the last truffle seed. Now is Snowball. Being a rabbit driven mad after his abandonment, Snowball is more crafty than your average pet, even if some still see him as insane. In the first movie, he's determined when it comes to his goals, even if his plans regarding said goals are a bit messy.
Get out!
Despite this, though, he's still able to stay on Max and Duke's trail. Prior to meeting the two dogs, he executes an impressive escape plan when he tries to help a fellow flushed pet escape from the dog catcher. Outside of these impressive moments, though, Snowball admittedly doesn't show a ton of intelligence. Even when he becomes a superhero, he tends to act more on emotion and gut instinct than well thought out plans. But hey, at least he knows how to fight. Following him is Sergey. There isn't a lot to say about him. He's about as cliche as they come in terms of being one-dimensionally evil. He's a circus owner, which means that he's probably got some decent business skills, and he was able to acquire and train several different animals, with some of them, such as the wolves, being trained enough to work for him. At the same time, Sergey is a cruel man who only really likes his pet monkey and seems annoyed by all other animals. As such, he's only willing to train animals in the cruelest ways possible, using things like whips and other punishments. Any professional trainer will tell you that these methods don't work long term, and that forcing an animal to obey out of fear only goes so far. Even if Sergey was only doing so out of contempt for his circus animals, we still have to say that this is a pretty dumb and unnecessary move for him that probably wouldn't have worked out for him long term, even if the other pets hadn't intervened. Next is Aloysius O'Hare. Given how lame he is as a villain, he naturally doesn't have too many strengths. I mean, just like how he tries to convince the crowd at the end of the film to let the tree die.
Let it shrivel up and come on, who's with me?
Not really a smooth talker, but we have to give him credit where where it's due, and compared to the Onceler, O'Hare was overall a smarter businessman. Not only did he successfully come up with a product that would improve people's lives, thus motivating them to continuously buy from him, but he also had several security measures put into place to assure that he could stay in power. He's no master manipulator, but he knows how to intimidate others into compliance. Now, would it have been smarter for him to just allow trees to come back, losing out on some profits, but at the same time being able to stay in the town's favor? Yeah, probably, and that's why we can't rank him any higher. But for what it's worth, we can understand why he was able to stay in power for several years. Next is the one and only Jimmy Crystal. Head of an entire entertainment empire, Jimmy knows how to charm anyone and everyone who tries to speak with him, allowing him to rack up a ton of popularity, wealth, and a stunning reputation. Unfortunately, his on-camera persona is far from the real him, and while he's a lot more savage than some would believe, he also isn't the entertainment genius that he pretends to be. Obviously, his dumbest moment was when he gave Buster a show, simply because Buster said he knew Clay Calloway, not bothering to double-check if this was true until after he had already started funding the show. In the latter half of the film, Jimmy's actions are easily more driven by rage than logic. Not only does he try to kill Buster in front of witnesses, which would have gotten him arrested regardless of his wealth or status, but many have pointed out that if he just allowed the show to go on, it would have been a win-win for him. He could have taken credit for the idea, like he tried and failed to do at the end of the film, and he could have made a lot of money off encore performances of the show, while avoiding being arrested, at least for a little while. Like the Onceler, it's a case of an otherwise fairly smart villain doing what feels the most emotionally satisfying to them, instead of doing what actually makes sense. Finishing off the tier, we have Bell Bottom. Out of the remaining Vicious 6 members, it's easy to see how Belle ends up being their new leader. She's confident, skilled, level-headed, and knows how to think on her feet. We get an excellent showing of this at the start of the film, where she's able to outmaneuver and escape the ABL. She and her team also trick Wild Knuckles into getting them the Zodiac Stone before betraying him. Though, you could argue that her dismissal of Wild Knuckles and Gru was foolish, even if she didn't know what Gru was capable of.
Come back when you've done something to impress me.
We should also note that it seems to take the Vicious 6 forever to track the two of them down, only finally getting the Zodiac Stone back at the very last second. In the finale, we see how Belle is a strong and clever fighter, and that she's able to stop Knuckles from grabbing the stone. But on the other hand, she plays with Knuckles and the minions instead of just killing them, so let's be honest, that's foolish too. Overall, you could probably go either way with Bell Bottom, but for us, we'd say she's just on the edge of being above average in terms of intelligence. Next, we have the characters who are college-bound, the ones who are just barely below our super geniuses. Beginning this tier, we have Vector. This is another case where it's hard to really know just how smart he is, though Vector's smart moments are more frequent than Belle's. He's a whiz at using tech, even if it's hard to say which ones he invented himself and which he just bought with his dad's money, aside from things like his squid launcher, which that's pretty silly.
Oh yeah!
At any rate, he knows how to put up a well-armed defense and can be strategic when he wants to be, like when he steals the shrink ray from Gru and kidnaps the girls. We have to point out that aside from Vector sometimes making foolish mistakes out of cockiness, he can also be really unobservant. He fails to notice anything suspicious with the cookies that were delivered. It takes him several days to realize his shrink ray's gone, and he doesn't even notice the moon returning to normal size until it's too late. With this being his biggest flaw when it comes to his intelligence, it's hard to be as impressed with his successes. Next is Scarlet Overkill. While we can't necessarily call her the smartest Despicable Me villain, as you'll see soon, we can still give Scarlet credit for being so impressive and so successful. As the story goes, she was apparently able to build herself a criminal empire by the age of 13. She's skilled at using both her husband's inventions and her own fist, being a martial arts master. We're sure she had many more successes, given how many admirers she has in the villain community, so we'll give her credit for that. But many have agreed that for as impressive and powerful as Scarlet is, she's once again a villain where her defeat is prompted by a case of anger and pride overshadowing logic. If not for Scarlet choosing to disown and later trying to destroy the minions, who she believed were traitors, despite the minions doing exactly what she asked, albeit in a roundabout way, Scarlet probably would have gotten away with all her crimes.
Don't you Scarlet me, you backstabbing little traitors!
If she had just forgiven the minions for their betrayal, she would have not only the crown, but also an even bigger army of loyal followers. It's a decision that many fans are still baffled by, and it's why we can't rank her any higher. Now we have Carlos from Hop. Although he's very silly, we have to give Carlos credit that if it weren't for EB's drumming skills and Phil's love of dancing, he could have gotten away with this coup, allowing him to become the new Easter chick.
It's called a coup d'etat, which is French for coup d'etat.
After all, he not only knows all the ins and outs of the factory, but he's also an extremely skilled manipulator, as seen when he briefly tricks Mr. Bunny into thinking that EB is dead and that Fred is responsible. When the truth is revealed, Carlos keeps the upper hand, even defeating the Pink Berets single-handedly, thanks to some liquid chocolate. He may be arrogant, but he knows how to execute a plan, and is able to think on his feet. He's the first villain on this list who doesn't have an obvious flaw in his intelligence or notable lapse in logic, but he's still not the smartest villain in Illumination. Next is Balthazar Brett. You wouldn't think a campy, shoulder pads wearing villain voiced by Trey Parker would be one of the smartest in the series, but here we are. And with how much he manages to keep the Groove family on their toes, maybe we shouldn't be too surprised. For as silly as his various homemade weapons and gadgets may be, they manage to also be incredibly effective. Things like expanding bubblegum, his exploding Rubik's Cube, and his sonic keytar make getting away with his crimes almost like child's play to him, and we have to assume he invented all these things himself, which is impressive. Being an actor, Balthazar also pulls off two successful disguises, the Jewel Inspector and then Lucy, showing how observant and skilled he can be.
Now that's entertainment!
We also can't forget about his sweet dance fight skills, which are almost unbeatable. Simply put, he was at the top of the ABL's most wanted list for ages, and we totally understand why. The final character of the tier goes to El Macho, and he gets the bronze medal of braininess. One would think that El Macho would be more brawn than brain, but while he does employ super scientist Dr. Navarro to help with the execution of his plans, the plans himself are all him. He successfully faked his death and hid in plain sight at a mall, framed the fellow store owner to get the ABL off his trail, and nearly took over the entire world with rabid minions. It's easy to see that El Macho is more clever than he may first appear. He's also more observant than characters like Vector, which allows him to figure out Lucy's secret identity as an ABL agent. While other Despicable Me villains may have more power, connections, or influence, it's El Macho who beats almost all of them in terms of sheer intelligence. We have now arrived at the genius level characters. The silver medal of braininess goes to Herb Overkill. Obviously, Herb isn't exactly a super villainous guy. He's laid back and friendly in some cases, even to the minions after they become enemies of his wife. Though he's friendly and not so evil, it doesn't change the fact that he's, as far as we're concerned, the smartest inventor in the Despicable Me franchise.
It was me, her, the whole time.
Some of his inventions include lava guns, a hat that controls people's minds, and his wife's rocket-filled coronation dress. All of his weapons are shown working as intended, without any major flaws or downsides, making him the most successful inventor that we see from the series, even if he himself isn't the most clever, having that himbo energy despite being a twig. Finally, the gold medal of braininess goes to the Grinch. We're giving our highest ranking to another, not so bad actually inventor, but can you really blame us? While the Grinch can sometimes be clumsy in executing his plans, his actual inventions and heist gear for his big holiday theft are simply top-notch. Not only do they make stealing all the presents and decorations in Whoville an absolute breeze, but the fact that they were all made in just a few days makes them even more impressive.
Now let's steal Christmas.
He's also invented things for his home to make his life more convenient, and the credits show him inventing machines to help Cindy Lou's mother with her household chores. If not for his change of heart, he would have gotten away with his crimes rather easily thanks to his gadgets, and despite his awkwardness, he's still clever and skilled enough at quick thinking to convince Cindy Lou that he's Santa. For these reasons, we felt there wasn't anyone else who could compare. He may not be much of a villain, but he's still the most brilliant Illumination character here. Alright guys, that's the list. Let us know in the comment section if you agree with our ranking, and tell us what we should cover next. Remember to hit that notification bell and binge our dumb to brilliant playlist, where we figure out which characters have the most wits. But most importantly, stay wicked.